Thank you. And thank you all for viewing this presentation titled Slaying the Beast, the most pervasive, a playbook for the most pervasive adware macOS. A little about me. My name is Aspen Lindblom. I currently work as a threat analyst at CrowdStrike. Before that, I worked a couple years in IT at a local managed service provider here in Southern California. And I like to consider myself a lifelong learner because back when I was IT, I had to work on Mac systems because no one really wanted to work on Mac systems in a Windows environment. But coming to CrowdStrike, I had to also embrace, Mac and Linux, as well as adware on both Mac and Linux and malware. And digging into that and like reversing that, I realized that there's just so much I don't know. It's like the more I learn, the more I realize I don't know. So this talk, I'll be breaking down the first payload of Slayer, which is just an installer, because I believe that learning how it functions and knowing how the attack will look like will better prepare you to defend yourself against it and investigate if it's in your environment. Now, mom joke here, peeling back the Slayers or the layers is because when you look at a Slayer installer, it is comprised of multiple bash scripts, or depending on the operating system, ZSH or SH. And it usually, spoiler alert, arrives as Adobe Flash Player. So the infection vector is commonly actually through browser pop-ups, and I have seen it come through pirated software. So you might have some people, some users that are downloading cracked software, thinking that it's cracked software, but it's actually Slayer, or they come across a website to watch some sports games, to stream some video games, and it redirects them to a browser pop-up, a really aggressive browser pop-ups that will tell you to download Adobe Flash. So it's essentially a Trojan and it's a downloader. So the main goal of Slayer is to download and then persistently install other adware families, with bunlore and adload being the most prevalent. And once either of those land on your machine, it then goes out to download more adware on your machine. So first things first, that browser pop-up. So this is something that I encountered on my Mac VM. I was cruising around some sites intentionally trying to trigger this. And so what I had saw was I was at a streaming website to stream some games, and it was a browser redirect that I encountered where it redirected me from that streaming website to this this pop-up. And if you look at this, it says, Flash Player might be out of date. Also, by the way, Flash is end of life on Mac, but yet people just keep falling for it. And there's no real options other than to either update, download Flash, and that little X at the bottom right corner of the screen, if you click on that, it forces the download of Slayer. So this is so aggressive that the only really way to combat it is to either close the tab or close the browser. So throughout the next slides, I will actually list the minor tactic and technique of each stage in this payload. And that way you can kind of map to see where this lands on the MITRE attack framework. And this also hits on masquerading as a legitimate file due to it pretending to be Adobe Flash, which again is end of life. So it's a DMG that gets downloaded on a disk image file. And normally when you run a DMG, when you mount it, it will either present you with an instructions to drag the app over to the applications folder, or it has a .pkg file, a package file that then will invoke the installer. So this is what normal installers look like on Mac. Slayer, however, right off the bat, completely different. You have this image, and it gives you instructions on how to install it, just to trick you into installing it. So it tells you to right click on the install icon and then click on open. So that install icon to me looks a lot like an alias. So the first thing that I did was I went to terminal to then see what the contents of the DMG is. And that's why you would see this. So inside the installer, you have a hidden file, a hidden image file, which that image file was the image file that we saw when the DMG was mounted. And then we have a hidden folder, which conveniently is also called hidden. So whenever I see, you know, the little period or the dot in front of a file or folder, I know it's hidden. But it's also was nice of them to, you know, hard code the folder name hidden for me. And then there is that install. It is an alias to this install.command file. And so I took a peek inside that hidden folder, and sure enough, there is install.command, and then there's this other file, this hi88 file. So what I am assuming is that like somehow, some way, install.command will interact with that file. And sure enough, I was right. I took a look inside the install command file, and as a, you know, threat analyst, this is what I love. I love to look at scripts that are like decoded, that are encoded and encrypted to try to like decode it and decrypt it to see what it's doing. I just love things like this. So that's why I wanted to call out some of the scripts that you'll see inside of Shlaying. And there is some cool variables that I wanted to really highlight, like the decrypted man, which yes, it is a typo. It's going to be decrypted command, and it's going to run that command args that you see above, the decrypted man, and then it's going to call no h up, which is no hang up. It's going to call that decrypted man with no h up, and then kill terminal. So I went through the liberty of just like, you know, trying to decode it. And when I decoded it, this is what I had determined, that the app.dir is going to be volumes install.hidden. The temp directory was a directory that was created earlier in this bash script. So that was created when I ran this. And then the bin file is actually the archive file name right there, the HI, but backwards. So it's flipped. And you have archive, which is that file that I had assumed the install command was going to interact with. And sure enough, I was right. So decrypted man will actually, you know, echo out OpenSSL to decrypt and then base64 decode that archive file, and is then going to save it in that temp directory that was created using the file name that was in reverse. And the interesting part, this is where things get interesting. exatter-c is then invoked on that entire temp directory. That's going to clear the attributes of this file. So any file that's downloaded through the browser, or I think even through AirDrop, Apple will then flag it with a quarantine flag, and that's going to invoke Gatekeeper and invoke app notarization, but it's clear. So interesting. And then after that, you got chmod 777. So it's going to just give this full read write and execute permissions to everyone, followed by executing the file and then deleting the whole temp directory. That's what I can, you know, see from here. And then, so that's all done by no hup. So it's going to run that command, ignoring all system hangups. So then I wanted to look at this to confirm that that file, that CNK file, was an executable. And sure enough, yes, it is. It's a Mako executable. And then the next thing I did was I grabbed the SHA-SUM, the SHA-256 value, because I want to know more about this file to see what it likes, to see what Shlaying drops. And in this case, it is Bundalore in this one. But before going into that, recently, I want to say back in like April, this dropped. I'm sure you might have heard of this 0-day, this Gatekeeper Bypass, CVE 2021-30-657. This allows an attacker to create a fake application file. Oops, there goes my AirPod. Sorry. It creates a fake application file with a script masquerading as an executable. So this allows it, unfortunately, to bypass Apple's built-in security features like Gatekeeper, notarization, and file quarantine. And when you come across this Slayer variant that is going to abuse or exploit the 0-day, it looks slightly different. You still have that install alias, instructions on how to execute this. And this double click to install is an image file. So instead of clicking on it, I went ahead and then looked at the contents in this installer and saw that it looked a little bit different. So there is still a hidden image file for the image that's displayed when you mount the DMG file. And then the install is an alias to this folder, not called hidden this time, to the randomly named folder. And inside that folder is an application called 1302. So with app files, they're application bundles. And so clicking on that application will then tell the operating system to run the Mako file located in the contents macOS folder, which is 1302. I'm sorry, 1302. But it's not an executable. It actually is a bash script. And the contents of that bash script looks like this. So you have similar activity going on here where it's going to create a temp file in the temp directory, but it's going to prefix the word installer to it. So it's going to be installer.xxxx with those X's being the PID, I believe, of make temp, followed by tail-c being invoked. So tail, that's going to tell tail to start at this area that I highlighted in red, which is a compressed binary file. It's going to send that over to funzip with a hard-coded password, followed by saving that to the temp that was created. And then it's just going to chmod with executable rights, and it's going to no h up it. So because this already bypasses the Gatekeeper, it doesn't need to do that x-c to clear the file quarantine. And just a quick recap on what was bypassed just in this Slayer installation alone. We had that 0-day bypass Gatekeeper, bypass standardization, and quarantine, but the execution of that install command actually is a legitimate way of bypassing Gatekeeper. It's not a bug, but a feature. And the x-c will then remove the quarantine bits from the file. Another thing that I found very fascinating was when I was reading that 0-day write-up by Cedric Owens, he had mentioned that as a red teamer, he likes to save and run files from the temp directory because it is exempt from Apple's TCC. And that's the, that prompt that you get when you open a file. It says, are you sure you want to run this file? It was downloaded, or this file wants to have access, like, file read, write access to your disk. Do you want this? Do you want to grant them that permission? That sort of thing. So it is excluded. The temp directory is excluded from that Apple's TCC. And I know I wanted to focus mostly on Slayer in this presentation, but when I saw Bundlor execute, Bundlor, when I saw it execute, it did some pretty cool things, pretty fascinating things I just wanted to highlight about. So I did confirm by running that hash through VirusTotal, which I completely love. As soon as I get a hash value of a file, I check to see, does VirusTotal know about it? And if it does, what do other AV vendors say about it? Because I was like, this looks like Bundlor, am I correct? And sure enough, everyone else agreed with my assumption. So Bundlor execution that I saw was this just blob of text. And it is doing system discovery, but for a very, deliberate reason. So what it's going to do, let me actually just highlight some of the cool functions. They're not really cool, but some of the cool functions that I had saw. So it's again going to create a temp directory, but it's going to check first to see if the Slayer installer or the Bundlor installer is already mounted to the disk or mounted to disk. And if it is, then it's not going to do anything. But it's also going to check the quarantine, the SQLite database that keeps a record of all the quarantine files to see if it's if there was a file downloaded from one of its, advertise or adware campaigns. And I found it so fascinating because I saw like UTM_source, another parameter of SIDW, another parameter of NEO. And when I had downloaded, Slayer, I did have a I had an SIG parameter, but marketing companies, advertising companies, they use UTM and codes and other parameters to, tell where their traffic is coming from, identify URLs that's driving the most content, identify top performing channels, as they call it, measure the effectiveness of their marketing campaigns and design future ones focused on increasing, clicks or ad revenue. Adware does the same exact thing, except they don't have, a term of service to hide behind, and they install without your consent. So if you're concerned about your data being sold to other advertising companies, or you're concerned about privacy from other legitimate big tech companies, you should be concerned about adware because it does the same thing, but in a malicious, with malicious intent. So this is why we continue to see fake Adobe, Flash Player downloads as a way of Slayer getting on machines, because they are tracking how successful their campaigns are. That's why you see more of fake Adobe Flash versus pirate software, because pirate software isn't the #1 driver for Slayer. It is, unfortunately, fake Adobe Flash Player. And they know this, and then they just keep, they keep tracking and measuring the effectiveness, and then they just modify. This has been around since 2017 and 2018, and they just continue to change and tweak, and they have so many variants. It's actively, worked on, actively maintained, actively changed, and it's still infecting machines as we speak. And I believe, this is my belief, that this is why, because they track the effectiveness of their adware campaign. So knowing that, there are some mitigations that we could employ to slay the beast, slay all day. Up first is endpoint protection. And I wanted to be neutral here and not even talk about antivirus because I work at CrowdStrike. So I wanted to call out AdBlock. I run AdBlock on everything. I love it, except for my mobile device. And I hate that because whenever I'm on a website that has a ton of ads, my battery just dies and cries. But AdBlocker is really good at preventing a lot of the malicious infections that you would get from ads. There's another way you can do DNS sinkholes. The unprofessional way of doing it could be like, Pi-hole, but you're probably in a corporate environment, so you might not want to use a Pi-hole. Maybe another DNS service that could do some DNS sinkholing. I think Dime DNS, if that's still a thing, that's from my IT days, would do that. You also want to employ some user, maybe even some software controls. Maybe you don't want your users to be able to install anything, or maybe you do, so they don't bug you all the time, but only like pre-approved software. So that's one way of protecting the endpoint. Another is education. So you can educate your users to that, you don't need Adobe Flash. If you're on a Mac, you just don't need it. It's not even used. Just if you see it, just ignore it, close it, close out the tab or browser. Don't click anywhere in that page that's telling you to download Flash. Also, threat research, which you're doing now. You're learning about, how Slayer operates, how it functions, how it plays out. So then you can visualize the attack and then visualize a defense. It's very similar, if you watch sports, to watching the tape, as they call it, reviewing how an opposite player, how their playing method is, and then just defending against that. Very similar. And when you're already doing that, so check that box right off. Monitoring. So I recommend monitoring files downloaded, files written, files executed. Now, this part is the fun part for me, kind of. I like monitoring. At first, it could be overwhelming if you're monitoring every file downloaded, every file written and executed. So I recommend maybe start off with some key directories of interest. Maybe you want to look and monitor for files being downloaded to the downloads folder, files being executed and written from the volumes folder or the temp folder. Like those are two most common directories that are targeted by Slayer. So those are good directories to monitor first. You also want to look for user and folder permission changes. Again, mostly in that temp directory. Just start off there and maybe start to branch out and filter it and adjust as needed. And indicators. So once you do threat research, you normally on that article or presentation, they will give you a list of either IPs, domain names, SHA values, script contents. Those are great to keep and ingest into whatever logging system you're using and just say, monitor for this in my environment and alert when it is seen. And that gets to the next step of responding. So I completely recommend setting up a lab environment where you can just have fun. Well, have fun in a safe environment. I would recommend that you go out to download these files, set up monitoring in your lab environment, and then detonate those files to see, what logs are captured in your software, and then see if you can set up any alerts around it. And then after you do that, just monitor the alerts so you're not getting just overwhelmed with alert fatigue. And then from the lab environment and the detonation, you can practice remediation. You can practice, by detonating, you can see, okay, this will write a plist file in either the launch agent or launch daemons folder, or it will create a folder in the application support folder. So that's where we should go to delete that, or it'll create a cron job. So let's go ahead and make sure that's removed. So those, having that, playbook, in a sense of like how to remediate and respond to this from doing a detonation in a lab environment, I would highly recommend doing that, because then you're not spending times or spinning circles trying to figure out how to remediate versus you already know how to do that. And that's it. You can find me at saltypopcorn_RE or in the Discord for Q&A, right?